So this year I intend to at least double, if not triple, the amount of tomato plants I'm growing. This year I won't just be growing them in the greenhouse, I'm going to fill a raised bed as well. And my plan for doing that means I'm going to call on my gardening neighbour and my good buddy Scott, because he's kind of an expert. Howdy neighbour! Scott, are you busy?
God. No, not busy at all. Just the first day that I've had good weather to be outside and do anything in the garden, but I've got plenty of time for you.
Have you started your tomatoes yet?
Started tomato seeds. I am months away from starting my tomato seeds. It's still cold here. I've got snow on the ground and a lot more on the way. It's way too early in the season for me to start my seeds.
Did he seem a wee bit harassed to you? So many tomatoes this year! So then, I've learned about the season that a tomato has for it to grow and ripen, and the fact that all tomatoes are different. It's not just a standard thing. But I've also learned about how my season in my garden for growing tomatoes is important too. And lastly, about how that affects when you sow your seeds. And it's all really amazing stuff. And do you know what? It's actually not even that complicated or scary. It's one of those things that makes total sense when you hear it. And it goes like this. I have got a whole heap of tomatoes here, which are the varieties that Scott and I are going to grow this year, because we've decided to have a bit of fun and we're going to compare our tomato growing in our two very different gardens. So if you don't know Gardener Scott, he is in Colorado. His garden gets battered by extremes. Feet and feet of snow and crazy, like -20°C temperatures in winter, and a sudden change to super hot spring and then crazy hot summer. So for him, he struggles to grow tomatoes in a greenhouse because it gets too hot for the tomatoes. I don't have those extremes. But what happens to me that makes it difficult is everything is gradual, so it takes a long time for my garden to heat up. And in fact, I was going to say in spring, but the truth is, it's almost summer before my garden's warm enough for tomatoes to be grown out there. But it's the same at the other end. It begins to get cooler much quicker. So that means I've actually got quite a short season for growing tomatoes. And I can then compare it to the tomato varieties to find the varieties that might do okay in my season because they have a growing season that matches mine. And that is the best way to choose your varieties. Not what I did this year at all. So here then is the first big change that has happened this year. I didn't choose what I'm going to be growing this year. We let you guys choose what I was going to be growing. Because Scott and I had a bit of fun on a live stream on his channel where we gave you guys a list of varieties and asked you to choose which ones we were going to grow.
And so if you're joining us late, we're looking for your suggestions on what tomato plants that we're going to be growing in our respective gardens this year. Both Eli and myself growing the same plants, but in gardens. So not only are you 1,200 miles north, but you're almost 5,000 miles away. So it's a big difference.
Feels like I can just peek over the fence and go, hi.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Feels like I can just peek over the fence and go, hi.
Yeah, that would be nice.
We let you choose. And now, both Scott and I are growing those varieties. The idea being that we could compare how things grow in our two very different climates and our environments. Because as I said, I'm usually a greenhouse grower for my tomatoes and Scott is normally an outside grower. So there's going to be that little bit of comparison. Now, obviously, we need to have a think about the varieties and if we can actually grow them outdoors in our greenhouse, etc. So that's what we need to do next then. So here's the first thing then. This is how you work it out. Tomatoes need a nice, consistent temperature, around 15°C and upwards. Most of the time, like if you can, overnight as well. They will cope with shorter periods where it's slightly cooler, but they will not cope with cold and absolutely not with frost. For me, believe it or not, that's kind of early June. My final frost is roughly the 18th of May, but actually I can still be getting very, very cold temperatures, especially overnight, until we're into June. So that's when my tomato season starts, because that is when I would be happy putting little plants in the garden. Now, the other end of that, when does your garden start to see those temperatures drop, when you're no longer seeing those consistent 15°C? For me, believe it or not, that can be early September. And what that means is I'm less likely to be able to get those tomatoes that are still on the plant to ripen. So that's effectively my season ending.
Hey honey, do you want a coffee or a tea?
Oh yes, please. It's freezing. You might want to ask Scott if he wants a cuppa. He's out working as well.
Oh God. Scott, do you want a cuppa?
Oh, that would be great, Kate. Thank you. Earl Grey, if you have it.
Scott, you want to give me a hand with this bit as well?
Sure, I can help with that. It is getting a little windy and cooling, and I can probably use a break, so let me move into the greenhouse. Okay, that's a little bit better. We've got a big storm blowing in today. So let's get to the seeds. I like to use my last frost date as an anchor date in my gardening calendar. It's a general guideline of when to start most of my seeds, and tomato seeds generally should be started 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost date, but that's for people with normal weather. I have such extremes that I like to give myself a 2-week buffer, because we usually are going to get a frost or a freeze after the average last frost date. So for me, that means I'm really starting my seeds 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost date. If I start at the recommended time, my plants are going to probably be 8 to 10 weeks old by the time I put them in the garden, and that's usually just too tall and lanky. So I like a little bit of a shorter plant that's healthy and strong when it comes time to put the plants out in the garden. Oh, thank you, Kate. I appreciate that. At least you are really considerate.
So the next step then, I said tomatoes all have a different season. So I've got my list here, and Scott has got the same list of tomatoes. We're growing the same ones. But whatever our season is and whatever those seasons for the tomatoes are, we need to match them up, and that will tell us whether we grow them in the greenhouse or in the garden. Thank you, honey. My hands are freezing.
So are mine. I'm going to make one for me too.
Oh, excellent plan. Thank you. I've made a list for you guys here. So we're going to start with the tomatoes that have the longest season. So that's Black Crim. Now, this one is one of Scott's favourite tomatoes. I've never grown it before. That one has between 70 and 90 days as its season. Now, here's the thing. If you don't know what your tomato season is for your variety, you can have a Google and go and search for, say, days to maturity. So Black Crim, days to maturity. That means from when it's a little plant to when you're harvesting the fruit. That's the days. Don't stress over it being too exact, because there's going to be lots of variables. Barry's Crazy Cherry. Now again, I've never grown this one before, but it's a bit of fun. I saw loads of people growing it on the internet last year, and it looks like a bit of a crazy tomato plant. It gives so many little cherry tomatoes. So we just want to try it for a bit of fun. But this one has 75 days as its growing season. So you can see how with my roughly 85 days, this is really pushing it. If I get a period of bad weather, Okay, so you can see how this is working. Kellogg's breakfast. Another new one on me. I'm just being so adventurous this year. That one is 80 days. So again, it's one I need to think about. So that is the 3 longest season. So for me, that means I'm going to grow them in the greenhouse, because if I get a bad season or even a few weeks of rough weather, I will struggle with these guys outdoors. Whereas if I grow them in my greenhouse, I can kind of steal a few weeks. I can extend my season. So they're a nice safe bet for me. Scott, what about you with those 3? Where are you growing them and why?
I just moved inside to take some notes and enjoy a fine cup of tea. Warms my belly and my heart. What I'm finding is that you and I are more similar than maybe we thought. My last frost date, coincidentally, is May 18th, and I also aim to put my plants in the ground the beginning of June. That's that 2-week buffer that I was talking about. And I also use September as the time of year to help define the length of my growing season. Now, we do differ a little bit because of the kind of weather that we have, and I'll stay warm, actually hot, until I get that dramatic freeze, maybe September, maybe October. So I actually use a 100-day growing season for my tomatoes. Your conditions are a little bit different, so I can understand why yours is less. But I'm growing outside for most of my tomato plants, and I can expect about 100 good days of tomato growing weather and temperatures every year when growing outside. This year, I'm going to have to think a little bit more about the growing indoors. Like you pointed out, my greenhouse is going to be very, very hot, so I'm going to have to add some ventilation, probably some shade fabric, and really pay attention to how my tomatoes are growing in the greenhouse. It's been easy for me growing outdoors because the conditions are perfect in my garden for tomatoes. But 100 days outside, I'm not sure yet what that will equate to in the greenhouse. Probably closer to 120 days. We're just going to have to wait and see.
Now, the other varieties we're going to grow are all a bit shorter seasoned. So we have, let's see, Gold Nugget, 55 days. So that should be okay in my garden. Sweet Million, and these are seeds I have saved from my plants because I have grown this lots and I love it. 62 days. Black Cherry. Now, this is another of Scott's favourites, and Robin at Robin's Container Garden gave me these seeds. These are her saved seeds. So I'm quite excited to grow these. 64 days. Sun Gold. Now, again, these I have grown and they taste amazing and I love them. But I also know a lot of Scottish growers who grow these in their garden. So I know they're kind of reliable. And that's because they're a 65 day. So again, it's back to this nice short pile. So those are going in my garden. Scott, what about you?
So I'm lucky that I've got a pretty big outdoor garden and right now a lot of space in my greenhouse. This will be the first year that I'm actually growing in my greenhouse for the full season. So I'm planning on growing those 3 tomatoes both in the greenhouse and outside. I know I can do it outside because I've been doing it for years. It's really a bit of an experiment to see for me how well they'll do in the greenhouse. And I'm thinking about doing it 2 different ways in the greenhouse. You like to grow in your containers, and I want to try to use that method as well as we compare our results. So I'll be growing those tomatoes in containers in the greenhouse, but I might also grow those 3 in the ground in the greenhouse, because that's how I've designed it, to actually have a space to grow in the ground. That's my plan for now. I think I'm going to do the 3 in 3 different ways and then really see how it works.
Now, I've actually also got 3 varieties that Scott isn't growing. These have been given to me by Camilla over at Camilla's Country Living on Instagram. She's actually a market gardener and she's famous for her tomatoes. And she's chosen these especially for me to grow here. And the 3 of them are Teton de Venus. Now, these are an ox heart, which means they're a nice big tomato. they look stunning, which is why she's given me them, because she knows that I admired her photos of them. Now again, these are a long season one. These are about 75 to 90 days. So these are going to be in my greenhouse. My other two are going to be outdoors. And these are little tiny plants. So I might grow these in my new green stock even outside. And these are Anmori Dewdrop or Anmore Dewdrop, 50 days. Apparently these guys are perfect for a hanging basket. Farthest north, which is a super early variety, 40 to 45 days. Super early. So I'm quite excited. So all of these are going to be grown outdoors.
Good tea. So, like you, I will be growing more varieties than just the few that we're growing jointly. Not as many as I've grown in the past, but that's because I have a focus this year. I really want to grow more tomatoes for canning and for sauce making. So the ones I chose are San Marzano, of course, an Italian heirloom tomato, and an Amish paste tomato. They should do well, and I've got an entire section of my garden set aside just for those tomato plants. Generally, the plants that do best in my garden are the cherry tomatoes. Because of my shorter season, the cherries just are very prolific and grow very well. And every year I try something new to see what I might stumble across. Like last year it was the black cherry, and now I love it. This year it's going to be the Hagen Little Yellow Tomato. I've never grown this before, don't know much about it, but I'm willing to give it a try. And then of course, some of the old standards like the Sun Gold and the Sweet Million and Early Girl. Now, Early Girl, at least here in the States, is one that's sold in every store in the neighborhood that sells tomatoes. One of the reasons is because it does so well. Way to save money is, instead of buying the plant at the store, buy the seeds. So that's what I'm going to do.
So the next thing then, how does this help me decide when I sow my seeds then? Quite simply, it's like this. We've already talked about how I wouldn't want to put these little plants out into my garden until June because the temperatures just don't suit them. So therefore, I don't want to sow them too early because then I have to baby them and mollycoddle them and look after them in the greenhouse. And, I'll run out of space. So these ones will get sown a bit later than these, which are my ones for the greenhouse. Remember I said the greenhouse lets me steal a few weeks back? Well, these guys I can grow early. So from experience then, I know I can sow my seeds maybe the second week in March and get brilliant harvests from them for my greenhouse tomatoes. So that's when I'm sowing these guys. Now for outdoors. So I'm actually going to sow these in April, possibly the second week of April. So that these are nice strong little plants before I put them out, but they're not too big. But remember, you're also going to need some time to harden them off before you put them out. But we'll cover lots more on all of this stuff in later videos. So there you go. But that's not all, even more goodies for you. Scott and I are going to be doing lots of these videos on my channel and his right through this season to keep you guys up to date and so you can grow your tomatoes along with us. So make sure to watch out for Scott's video, which is going to be his take on all of this, like mine was today. But also, if you want more tomato growing goodies from me, this video is my start to finish everything about growing tomatoes. And that just leaves us to say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.
Wait a minute. I do the comedy around here, thank you.
See you, folks.